Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. It is Sunday, April 27th, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with legal correspondent Jeremy Sharon and environmental reporter Sue Sirks. Hi to you both.
Good morning.
Hey, Jessica. Good morning.
Hi there. Good morning. It is day 569 of the war. A soldier and a border police officer were killed in Gaza on Friday afternoon as the IDF continues to ramp up their offensive. Meanwhile, at the weekly Saturday night anti-government rally, an ex-Shin Bet chief called for a non-violent revolt. And today, the High Court ordered the government to explain the shortfall of conscription orders for Haredi yeshiva students. We will talk about the latest with the International Criminal Court, the ICC, where there was a procedural victory for Israel, and as well as the risk of a constitutional crisis in Israel. Jeremy will take us up to date on that. We'll also look at the very rare shark attack that took place off the coast of Hadera and what life is like in the southern city of Ofim since October 7th, 2023. That will be with Sue. So stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. Okay, so Jeremy, you've reported on what is being called a procedural victory for Israel. That was on Thursday at the ICC, at the International Criminal Court, with a ruling for Israel asserting its right to appeal whether the court has jurisdiction to try Israeli citizens for war crimes. So if you could take us through that and what that means, of course, in the larger context of all of this, which were the arrest warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and for former Defense Minister Gallant. But I'm sure there's much more in the background that you're going to fill us in on, because in this situation, there always is. So take it away.
Well, exactly. As you said, we're talking about the case of war crimes charges and crimes against humanity charges against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. So back in May 2024, the ICC prosecutor requested those arrest warrants. Israel then and a bunch of Israel's allies filed different challenges explaining its position and why those arrest warrants, that request was invalid and why the court doesn't have jurisdiction over Israeli nationals. But the court's pre-trial chamber, number one, went ahead and issued those arrest warrants. It approved the prosecutor's request for the arrest warrants in November 2024. And Israel subsequently appealed that decision, specifically saying that the pre-trial chamber had not taken Israel's challenge to the jurisdictional issue over Israeli nationals seriously enough, had not actually ruled on its merits of that challenge, and said that, that challenge could be ruled on at a later date. Now, just to explain that, what is the jurisdictional issue? Israel basically denies that the ICC has jurisdiction over Israeli nationals in the first place. The ICC works by one country basically delegating its own jurisdiction to the ICC over either its nationals or other nationals who might be part of the ICC. Israel is not a member of the International Criminal Court. And Israel argues that in the Oslo Accords, which were signed between Israel and, Palestinian entities, it explicitly denies that any Palestinian institution jurisdiction over Israeli nationals for any issue. So what Israel argues, and what it argued to the International Criminal Court, is that the Palestinian Authority never had the jurisdiction to delegate to the ICC in the first place, for the ICC to have jurisdiction over Israeli nationals and to issue these arrest warrants and bring its nationals up on charges. Now, the pretrial chamber did not address that and said that could be discussed in a later date. But actually, a ruling by the ICC in 2021 on when the ICC opened another separate investigation into Israel, it ruled at the time that the issue of jurisdiction would have to come up if and when a prosecutor of the ICC sought arrest warrants against Israeli nationals. So when those arrest warrants were sought, Israel said, well, hold on a second. The court said back in 2021 that the jurisdiction issue will be adjudicated before the arrest warrants are issued. And now the court has gone ahead, regardless of that ruling, and issued the arrest warrants and said, well, we'll have to decide on the jurisdiction issue even later. And basically what happened on Thursday is the appeals chamber basically agreed with Israel and said, actually, they're right. You should have, the pretrial chamber should have discuss this issue of jurisdiction on its merits before issuing the arrest warrants. So, as I said, it is a procedural victory. It's not on the substance of the claims, but it was actually a unanimous decision by the appeals chamber. All 5 judges ruled in favor of Israel. And the appeals chamber, its language was actually quite critical of the pretrial chamber. And as one Israeli expert said to me, the language of the appeals chamber was quite critical and did not really reflect well on the performance of the lower chamber. So that's where we stand. One other small aspect to add to this is that Israel also requested that while the jurisdiction issue be debated and discussed and ruled on, the arrest warrants which were issued be suspended. And the appeal chamber, in a rather convoluted and not very clear decision, decided not to suspend those arrest warrants. And that's where we stand at the moment. It will probably take several months for the pretrial chamber to come back and rule on this issue of jurisdiction. So for the moment, the process is, the whole legal process against Netanyahu and Gallant is kind of frozen.
And that's where it stands for the moment. Okay, really interesting and unexpected in a sense. One quick question about it. Way back when you've been reporting on this, obviously, since it all started, was the understanding for the Israeli team always that it would bring forth this jurisdiction issue? Was that always like sort of what they had in their back pockets to use in this ruling and in this case?
I mean, yes, that has long been the contention of Israel. As we can see, going back to that 2021 case, we were already arguing the jurisdiction issue then, and that's been one of the foundations of the jurisdictional of Israel's case now. We should mention that Israel also, and Netanyahu and Gallant also reject the substance of the allegations. Specifically these crimes against humanity charges that Israel used starvation as a weapon of war against the Palestinians. Israel rejects that and says it is, allowed in hundreds of thousands of tons of humanitarian aid and food and medicine to the people of Gaza during the war. Obviously, mistakes get made in terms of targeting and civilians die, and that's a whole other issue. But in terms of, the crimes against humanity charges, Israel has challenged the idea that there has been starvation, that people have died en masse from hunger. None of the international aid organizations, the international humanitarian organizations have provided data that there has been some kind of mass starvation event. So the issue of jurisdiction is very technical and very legal, but Israel also rejects the substance of the charges as well.
Got it. Okay. Moving on to another massive legal issue that you've been covering, of course, very closely. You have an analysis talking about which you've written about, that the allegations made by Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar, who is still in his position for the moment, the allegations that he made against the prime minister in the affidavit that he filed with the high court, that they could very much lead to a constitutional crisis in this country. Now, this is something we've been speaking about for months and months and months on end, really since January 2022. But if you could just take us to the point of your argument, of your analysis, which is why? Why will the allegations that he made against Netanyahu, why could those allegations bring us now to the brink or to a constitutional crisis?
Okay, so when the court heard the petitions earlier this month regarding firing Ronen Bar, the 3 judges on the court very much wanted to focus on the procedural problems with how he was fired. It wasn't done in a very orderly manner, and there was a key step taken where the government declined to go to the advisory committee which appointed Ronen Bar to ask it whether it agreed that he could be fired now. And so the court wanted to focus on this procedural issue. Why? Because when the government appoints a member of the executive, an executive agency like the Shin Bet, it's quite it's seen as part of the government's purview, as that's its role, and the court shouldn't have a role here. And the law says explicitly the government gets to appoint the Shin Bet chief, right? And here we have a situation where you've got petitions saying, well, that might be the case, but you also have to follow proper rules and regulations about how such decisions are made. And the government's kind of rejecting that. And we've already seen several cabinet ministers saying, if not to outright disobey the court, then to ignore it, to work around it. They said if the court says that that Ronen Bar cannot, that his dismissal was unlawful, then they should just not let Ronen Bar into key meetings, just ignore him when he speaks. The finance minister Bezalel Smotrich said he's going to go to the bathroom or have a cup of coffee while Ronen Bar speaks in security cabinet meetings. So you've got this situation where the government is already saying we don't want to listen to the High Court. Now, what happened is that, as I said, the court wanted to focus on the procedural issues, but Ronen Bar made these incendiary allegations that essentially his dismissal was based on political grounds, not professional reasons. And he said that that Netanyahu asked him to track government protesters, anti-government activists. He said that Netanyahu tried to get him to tell the court that he wasn't able to testify on a regular basis against what Bar actually believed. And that when Bar said no to these issues, to these requests and other requests, it was that refusal, to accede to whatever Netanyahu's political and personal requirements were, which is what caused Netanyahu to fire him. Now, when you make these allegations, and Bar made them in a sworn affidavit to the court, backed up with evidence and documentation, it becomes much harder for the court to ignore it. It wanted to tell the government to go to this advisory committee, have the advisory committee make its recommendation, and the court kind of hoped that the advisory committee would say, you know what, actually, there's some issues, problems here and there, but essentially the government, the decision it can stand. And then the court's let off the hook. Right now, the court, it'll be very problematic for the court to ignore these allegations of political interference in the functioning of the Shin Bet chief, because what are the implications for that down the line when the next Shin Bet chief comes in? If the government ignores those allegations, does that mean that the government if the court ignores those allegations, does that mean the Prime Minister and the government are able to essentially assert their political needs as requirements for the functioning of the head of the Shin Bet? So that's why it's become much harder for the court to ignore these allegations, and why we setting up this potential clash between the court and the government, which could really see, what is a constitutional crisis at the end of the day? It's when two branches of the government don't listen to each other, and then the institutions of the state don't know who to listen to either. So if the court says Ronen Bar was unlawfully fired, then who's heading the Shin Bet? Who does the employees of the Shin Bet think is the head of the Shin Bet? Who does the Attorney General think is the head of the Shin Bet? Who does the government think is the head of the Shin Bet? If the two branches of government are ignoring each other, then you kind of come into this chaotic situation of a constitutional crisis. And there is a risk that we can get there. Having said that, there is a couple of things which might avert that. Specifically, if Ronen Bar does actually resign in short order, that would pull everyone's chestnuts out of the fire.
Which he's been meant to do in a few days, essentially.
Well, he said he's going to announce when he's going to resign. If he says he's going to resign in the middle of May, which he has indicated possibly he might do, then the court will be able to get off and say, this is now moot, and maybe we'll make a couple of comments. The government should absolutely not make decisions on a political basis in terms of the hiring and firing of the Shin Bet chief. But that could basically be the end of it. If he says I'm only going to resign in 6 months, then the court will have to issue a ruling.
And that brings us back to your analysis, really, which is that we could be on the brink of this constitutional crisis.
Exactly. I mean, the court may still try and advance some kind of compromise again after, it will probably have to have a hearing after the affidavits are filed. And we should point out that Netanyahu is scheduled to file his affidavit in response to Ronen Bar's today. So, maybe either the court will be so convinced by Netanyahu's arguments that it can dismiss the case or dismiss the substance of the case and just go back to the procedural issues. But it may try and promote some kind of compromise again. And whether we'll see whether it has the ability to bring the two sides together.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate it. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we're back, we'll turn to Sue, shark attack, and what Ofim, the southern city of Ofim, looks like since October 7th. Stay with us. Sue, terrible shark attack late last week in which a very seemingly veteran diver was killed, mauled by the shark. And I know that you have now spent time at the Hadera coast and you saw the shark with your own eyes. What do we know about this? Obviously very unusual, but what do we know about it now? What does it mean for the coast of Israel?
First of all, I don't know if it was that shark that I saw. What's been happening over many years now is that at both power stations, both in Hadera, which is in central Israel, and in Ashkelon, which is in the south, sandbar sharks and dusty sharks have been coming roughly between the period November to May because the water's very warm there, thanks to the power station. So they come and they spend 3 to 5 days warming their bodies, and then they go out to sea for 3 to 5 days, presumably to hunt, and then they come back for another 3 to 5 days, and so it goes on. And this has been a kind of attraction for people for quite a long time. What happened over Chol HaMoed, which is the period of Passover, is that, and presumably also in previous years, now these sharks, first of all, are not known to be harmful to humans at all. So curious onlookers have been going to the beach. It's called in Hadera. It's called the Hadera Stream Park because there is a stream which opens out into the sea there. And they've been going into the water to get pictures and also, in some cases, to abuse the sharks. You know, there were reports of hitting them, reports of pulling their tails, all sorts of stuff like that. Now, what happened last week was that, and this happens every year, is that as the temperature warms up, there is a warming event in the river and it kills the fish. And so you have lots of fish floating on the surface of the river as it comes into the sea. And that obviously causes tempts the sharks into a kind of feeding frenzy. So on the one hand, you've got these sharks trying to get at the fish. And on the other hand, you've got these people in the sea basically making their lives a misery. So what happened on this particular occasion was that this man, Barak Tzach, actually went diving. He went out much further into the sea. People reported him shouting help. People reported blood on the surface of the sea. And then he went under, and it actually took some time for the police to find what they called findings, which they then sent for identification. And they discovered that this was, in fact, a father of 4, Barak Tzaf, from Petach Tikva. There were rumors immediately that he had fish on him to tempt the sharks. His wife then went onto Facebook saying that that was not the case at all. And then the police announced that the beach was closed. In fact, they announced that a number of beaches were closed, including at Bet Yanai, which is a bit further south, where sharks had also been seen in the waters, and terrified bathers had scuttled out onto the beach. And then there was a video which actually went viral of a police officer announcing on one of the TV channels that the beach was closed until any further announcements. But you could see all these civilians wandering around in the background. It was just completely crazy. So I went down on Friday afternoon.
Which I just want to note, Sue, I just want to know that's already a week later. That's a week after the event in which he was killed.
Yeah,
right.
Not quite a week, but almost. He was killed on the Monday. I went on the Friday, and the park is open and functioning, and there's actually no problem getting to the beach. There is a sign saying danger, and it has various danger symbols, including a shark, but you can easily get to the beach. And I have to say, not surprised to say that there were dozens and dozens of people. They were thronging backwards and forwards. There were people in the water. There was a group of 4 men up to their thighs in the water, throwing dead fish at the sharks to get them to come closer. And the shark that I saw was probably within a foot of them. I mean, it was just absolutely extraordinary. And so I, being who I am, waded into the sea in my clothes and my hiking boots to ask them, what they thought they were doing. I didn't get that close. And they said, well, it's fun. It's fun. And one of them said, wow, did you see? I threw the fish and the shark caught it. And there were actually 3 Arab guys and 1 Haredi guy from a local yeshiva. And they were just not scared at all. But interestingly, what they told me, one of them said he'd been there since 11. There was absolutely no police or city presence. At 3:00, a patrol car drew up and told off one of the guys, but I don't think arrested him or anything. I don't even know if it's technically a crime. And just before 4, a police jeep turned up with 4 policemen. Now, apparently there was another journalist there I obviously didn't see who tipped off the police. And if that hadn't happened, I was too busy talking to the fish throwers. If that hadn't happened, maybe they wouldn't have come at all. So I'm now waiting for a response from both the Israel police and the Hadera municipality.
To see what they have to say. Okay. Sue, on to the other beat that you've been covering for months, of course, which is what is happening with the communities down south. And you were in Ofakim, the southern city known for 52 people were killed there on October 7th, 2023. It's also, of course, the home of Rachel Edry, the woman who fed cookies and tea and drinks to Hamas terrorists in her home over many hours. But you wrote about something different that has been happening there, really a community coming together in a way that city communities don't always act in those ways and aren't able to pull together. So tell us what brought you down there and what you saw, what you found out.
That's exactly why I went, because I've been covering a lot on kibbutzim and moshavim, and I wondered how a city neighborhood was coping, because by their nature, they're not as community oriented as these other small villages. And I had the most wonderful tour guide, a 37-year-old high school teacher, actually teaches English, called Sarai Tani. She took me around, and first of all, she told me her story, and she said that before October the 7th, she was a very private person. Her husband did all the volunteering. He actually volunteers for the Hatzalah emergency and first aid organization. And they were at home on the 7th of October in their house in Tamar Street, which was one of the streets of a very small number that were basically ringed by Hamas terrorists in this neighborhood called Mishor HaGefen. Now, Mishor HaGefen is on the western border of the city. There's something like 40,000 residents in the city. It's a relatively poor city. And the terrorists came in through Mishor HaGefen and then formed a ring around a number of streets. So she was in her house. Her husband immediately wanted to go out and help until he got a message saying there's terrorists outside, stay at home. And after the horrors of that particular day, where 39 people were killed just within that neighborhood, including soldiers and police officers, she was advised to go and consult a psychologist. And she said, she went, she didn't need a psychologist, but she went anyway. And through the discussions, she realized that she'd also developed survivor's guilt syndrome. And the psychologist said to her, take this opportunity that you have of a life that was given to you and do something with it. And she said, I realized that I have to go out of my comfort zone. And so when the principal of her school asked her to take an overseas group around the neighborhood to see the damage that was caused on October the 7th, she volunteered. And since then, she has become a tour guide. And this is part of what we, call trauma tourism. There are lots and lots of groups coming to see what happened, including a lot of youngsters who were about to go on the March of the Living to Poland. I know that you were just there. And she took me around a few of the streets. And I already knew, because I'd spoken to the municipality, that the municipality has been very, very proactive. It immediately went to the residents. In fact, 5 weeks after October the 7th, it brought a theatre company and did a kind of playback thing where it invited residents to sit and tell their stories, and then their stories were acted out on the stage. And in fact, during that event, they collected 500 stories, which they used as a basis to create a songbook for Hanukkah. Since then, there's been a lot of community gatherings, which I'll come on to it into a minute. But the city prioritized the Mishor HaGefen neighborhood for physical renovations, not in the sense of pulling buildings down and rebuilding them, because the damage was mainly from bullet holes. So, for example, the house of Rachel Edry, they're not living there now, has been repaired. You can't see any bullet holes. You can see a few here and there on bomb shelters and what have you. They're relaying pavements. The community decided that it didn't want to focus all its energies on a memorial, although there is going to soon be a memorial. As Sarai told me, we don't want to be Yad Vashem. This is a living community. We want plants and gardens and what have you. And so that's where the municipality has been putting its money. So another thing that the municipality did, it took a villa whose residents had actually fled after October the 7th and haven't come back. It rented the villa and it turned it into a community centre, which it calls the Beit B'Mishor, which means the house in the Mishor HaGefen neighbourhood. And it brought in a former school principal to run it, who is a real bulldozer. And for the whole of last year, they were getting 200 people a week, something like that, for all sorts of activities, therapeutic activities, arts activities, dog training for youngsters, all sorts of stuff. They also have They already had another bomb shelter called in the Zeit, on Zeit Street, on Olive Street. And I was there that day. They were actually, everybody was making kosher matzot in the run-up to Pesach. And they've organized an extraordinary number of activities to bring people out. People were very scared to leave their homes. And what Sarai told me, there was on one occasion, they gave out 100 certificates to heroes of the neighborhood. And she said she realized that she just didn't know her neighbors. And she went to one man who had, received his certificate on the stage, got down from the stage, and she said to him, "Thank you. I now realize that you've saved my life." And it's, I've got goose pimples as I say that. It was really a very, very moving visit. There are murals on the walls. As I say, there will soon be a memorial and a memorial fountain. And it is socioeconomically, it's not an easy neighborhood. It's a neighborhood of single-story homes, probably built, or these particular streets anyway, probably built in the 1970s. A large Orthodox community, a lot of traditional Mizrahi Jews, who came originally from Middle Eastern countries. A lot of very, very old immigrants from Russia. And we actually finished off the tour. It was already getting dark by a bench where an old Russian couple used to sit every night. They were murdered on their way to a public bomb shelter. I should add, importantly, that none of the houses in the neighborhood, or most of them, did not have bomb shelters. And so the public bomb shelters, the terrorists knew where they were, and they gunned people down, as they went to the bomb shelters. And there was actually another elderly Russian couple sitting there. As we approached, they didn't speak any Hebrew. And next to it, somebody's painted a mural of roses. In fact, there's murals that people have painted and memorials that the citizens have put up all over the neighborhood, which shows a sense of community unity, I suppose. And that's it. Out of this tragedy, maybe will come more of a sense of unity and community within this particular neighborhood.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you, Sue. Appreciate it. Thank you to both of you. Jeremy, thank you, Sue, for being on today's daily briefing. It's been very helpful to hear what you've been reporting on and what you've been following for the last couple of days and weeks.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Jessica.
And thanks to all of you for listening to the Times Visuals Daily Briefing. We'll be back again tomorrow with another installment. This episode is produced by the Podwaves. Until next time, have yourselves a good day and Shavua Tov.